and a building that's ivied and caked with many years of thinking. I'm a poet. I've been a poet since I was 14. My father was a poet. It ran in the family, and it was easy for me to be a poet because of his writing, and I started writing poetry. I got to meet some of my father's friends. I'll very quickly tell you how I relate this to the media, because one of the first poets I met through my dad was Allen Ginsberg, who was a friend of his, and my dad invited him to Honolulu, to Hawaii, where we were living that was our first American experience in Honolulu, in Hawaii, on this tropical island. And then we went to the airport to pick Allen up, and he came off the plane, and we gave him a garland, a lei, and he had his harmonium, his instrument with him. And in the car, he sang a song called Sweet Oahu. And then we got to the house. He was staying with us. He stayed with us for about a week, and the phone rang, and I pick up the phone. I'm 14 years old. Imagine this. I'm 14 years old. I've just met this huge, famous poet. My dad introduced him as like the most famous poet in America. And here I pick up the phone, and it's Bob Dylan calling for Allen Ginsberg. Imagine what I felt like at 14, 15, And I was actually a little older. I was 17 when this happened. And I passed the phone to Allen, and I think that experience like that is a mediatic experience. It's an experience with living history and with contemporary culture, and it's just a blessing that I had that chance to be the carrier of the phone between Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg. And when that was during the Rolling Thunder Review, when they were performing together during those shows. And recently Martin Scorsese edited a movie based on that, on Bob Dylan and that old experience. And anyway, I haven't begun to tell you about myself, but I'm going to stop there. I'm just going to say I came to poetry and to the media through carrying a phone call between Bob Dylan and Allen Ginsberg. Yeah. Thank you. Welcome.
Welcome. That's great.
Amazing.
We don't have stories like that. So our topic is the media, and we usually go through in the order of our the name of our little symposium here: a lawyer, a poet, and a philosopher. So we will hand it over then to our resident lawyer, who we have on retainer here, Leo Glickman. So Leo, just introduce yourself and take it away.
Those first 15 minutes cost you $300, Joe. So that's what our retainer says.
Yeah. We need to be paying somebody for technical support.
So my name is Leo Glickman. I am a practicing constitutional lawyer, and I am not in New York City for the first time in about 2 months. I am sitting in the Hotel Faucher in Milford, Pennsylvania, which I just want to plug it and say how incredibly beautiful it is, and what a nice, apt little town this is, and everyone should come. It's just an hour and 20 minutes away from our little neighborhood of Washington Heights. But I'm feeling good just being away for a little bit. But anyway, yes, we're here to talk about the media. So I guess let's start by asking the question and answering it. What is the media? Well, the media, is the device by which we transmit information and content beyond ourselves. And I'm glad that Jane pointed out right off the bat that poetry is media. Poetry is media. Any transmission of content or communication is media, and media sounds neutral. I kind of like, it's just a conveyance, right? Like that's what, on the surface of it, it seems that way. But, and when I think about that, I think about the phrase when people say, "Oh, don't shoot the messenger," don't, I'm not responsible. It's whatever I'm telling you is, whatever message I'm delivering, it's that person's responsibility. So the media is the messenger. But I think that at least for the last 60 years or so, we've come to understand that the messenger is far from neutral. And when I say that, I don't mean that the media is biased in the sense of like some media outlet has a liberal or a conservative bias. I don't mean it that way. But I do mean that the medium itself shapes us and shapes our civilization. So cave drawings, poetry, written language, printing presses, telegraph, telephone, radio, TV, social media have all brought massive change to the social, intellectual, and even physical environment that we live in, irrespective of what the communication that it contains actually says. So, like I said, I think and I'm sure it goes further back, but for me, I can go as far back as 1960 when I think these ideas started percolating in the culture. And I'm thinking specifically about the Nixon-Kennedy presidential debates in 1960. Back then Nixon was the favorite in that race, in that campaign. He was considered sort of the seasoned and experienced and steadier alternative to John F. Kennedy, who was, young and inexperienced. But in that debate, which was on television, it was the first televised debate in our history. And Kennedy appeared, in those debates, handsome, young, elegant. He was eloquent. Nixon was, kind of sweaty and inelegant. And I think most political observers say that it turned the tide of the election, and that television made the difference. And people really started thinking about this, that, how the medium of television, or just the medium period, can have such a great effect on people's thoughts and people's choices. So, going on from that debate, we have the Marshall McLuhan comes on the scene. And he coins the phrase in the early 60s, the medium is the message. And he sold a lot of books and became rich and famous with that little pithy statement. But it sums up what I just sort of said a moment ago, which is that what he was saying is, in his the dominant media was television during that time, of course. So he was saying that television, in that case, being the medium by which we receive the content, is a far more influential factor on society than the substance of that content itself. That television, that it, has organized our society and organized ourselves and our lives in a way that's far more influential than what Walter Cronkite happens to be saying on a given night. So that was Marshall McLuhan in his view. My view is that the medium and the content are just very intertwined. And the effect the content has on the receiver, the person watching TV, for example, depends in part on which medium it's presented on. And the kind of content that I'm going to talk about in a moment is false information. But I do think, and what I'm about to talk about is how we receive and how we use false information is contingent on the media by which it's presented to us. And then I'm going to get into law, and the law, of course, as always, does a very poor job of managing all of this. So the legal backdrop is this: the First Amendment, the freedom of speech. Now, in the old days of television, the government was able to kind of get around some First Amendment prohibitions because television was is still broadcast on the public airwaves. So you had to get a license from the government for access to the airwaves. And with the license came certain responsibilities. So, when I'm thinking about some of the restrictions that the government placed on television broadcasting, I guess I could think of George Carlin's, the 7 words you can't say on TV, that bit, that springs to mind. And the government could do that only because that TV was on the public airwaves. The newspapers are different. Newspapers are not on public airwaves. In fact, the printing presses are privately owned. So the government has much less ability to control what appears in the newspapers. So, for example, for all those decades, we had something like the Village Voice, which was not something that you would ever see on TV, right? It was much more permissive in terms of language and subjects and things like that. And in fact, all the great First Amendment, freedom of speech cases from the 60s are about newspapers. They're never about TV stations. So, so the only real restrictions that newspapers would have were, there are some obvious restrictions to the First Amendment, like obscenity, child pornography, incitement to immediate violence, and defamation. So, you don't have a First Amendment right to defame somebody, for example. So just, to kind of go on about defamation a little bit, because that really brings us to the false information part of this. Defamation is the telling false or writing in a new publishing is what it is. Publishing false, harmful information against individuals. But when it comes to public figures and public officials, you can't be punished if you print false information about them unless you've done it with actual malice. So if you make a mistake about something the president did, you're not liable. You have to do it with malicious intent. And by the way, if you say something false, but that's nice about the president, that's also not actionable because you haven't actually harmed the president. Of course, you've harmed your readers, but that's not a First Amendment violation. So to go onto the internet and sort of bring the medium and the message together, that's the internet. Can there be any debate whatsoever that the internet and social media and YouTube and forget that Google searches, the information that we get on the first page of a Google search, there's just no doubt that that's altered the way our brains function and the way we function as a society. And I don't even think we completely understand it yet. And so, the internet, in contrast to newspapers and TV, is actually more democratic and more populist. The government doesn't control access to the internet like it does with television. And it's not expensive to publish on the internet like newspapers are expensive, right? I mean, a printing press and getting a newspaper out to 500,000 people is very expensive. So you're limited, your access is, as a practical matter, limited to it. So the fact that it is so democratic should be a good thing, but I think it's also led to a proliferation of false information. And I've been thinking about this lately only because I'm just agog at the insane things I see in social media about COVID-19. And the number of people who go along with it and believe this stuff. And it's really, frankly, making me question myself. I've always been a media elite skeptic, but, have I unwittingly encouraged people to believe that, random internet memes, that they should believe that over some peer-reviewed scientific fact, and the problem is that misinformation about COVID, for example, it isn't defamation. No one's being defamed. And by and large, the First Amendment protects the publication and distribution and writing of this false information. So that's what we have with the First Amendment. So the question is, that begs the question, well, is that a good idea, even if the First Amendment protects it? And I think of a friend who loves science, and he doesn't believe in the Big Bang Theory. He thinks that's bunk. And he doesn't believe, by and large, many theories in classical physics. And he presents information that is not crazy, but is not, peer reviewed to the level of the classical physics. So, should he be prevented from presenting that information? And how do we start to draw lines between false COVID information and false information or controversial information about classical physics, right? So that's the kind of questions that we face. But finally, and this is where I'm going to end, these are questions that we don't really have to worry about because government and the Congress is taking care of social media. Social media basically claims, well, let's say this: if you put a message in a bottle and leave it there, and the message says, kill the person standing next to you, and the next person picks up the bottle and reads the note and does it, the government treats Facebook and Twitter and Reddit and all these things like it's the bottle. That, well, the bottle isn't the responsible party here. It's the person who wrote the note. So that is, and that's that. It doesn't have to be that way, but it is that way. Congress passed this in the late 90s when the internet was first becoming prevalent. The Communications Decency Act, it's called. So false information and its perpetuation on these social media sites is protected. It's really strongly protected by the laws and the government. So, and I think that when you take that, the existence of false information and conspiracy theories, and tie that together with the way that social media has changed our brains and changed our environment and changed our civilization and society, I actually think it's kind of led to a strengthening in belief among more people in false information. For whatever reason, there's something about social media that makes people want to believe false information and perpetuate it. So that's my talk, law and the media, and I really, really look forward to hearing what the philosopher and the poet say. Both disciplines are media in themselves. So it'll be interesting. Thanks.
Thank you, Larry. I have a lot of questions, and what I had planned to talk about actually is very, very on point with a lot of the things you're saying, and what you just said about social media, you think makes people want to believe in and share false information, knowingly false, or I mean, do you think that they think of it as false, or not? They think that it makes them more susceptible or gullible. What I just wanted to be clear about the point you were making.
I think social media. No, I don't think I could say it's one or the other. I think that social media has enabled and really encouraged people to retreat into certain roles. So you have the elites the experts. Oh, you think you know so much, you're the expert, you know, but the expert is an expert for a reason. And I think that social media has enabled people who are resentful for whatever reasons they have, sometimes it's legit, oftentimes it's not, to present counter information, to allow themselves to play the role of being anti-elite and anti-expert. And I think that that's something that's specific to social media and not a kind of paradigm or dynamic that we would see with just television watching or newspaper reading.
Okay. I'll come back to that, but so let me let the poets take over.
We have a lack of strong leadership right now, and that results in us not knowing where to turn for our information. Like, if the president is firing everyone around him that says something he doesn't like, it's really giving it's setting the example that we're all allowed to do stuff like that. I mean, you see it's having these huge effects all over the world, how we just have, we imitate each other. We imitate what we see around us. And that's so much of why media is so powerful, because we do end up imitating it, and we do like incorporate it into our own personas and like replicate ourselves the way we see things being replicated around us. And with social media, it's so easy to share things and to not check things. And the loss of expertise, that everyone thinks they're an expert or doesn't have to trust experts. I think it actually is a paradigm shift. I think there really is something going on, and that our minds are changing and our culture is changing, and we're all connected, and we're all finding our little, the echo chambers that we want to like live in. And there's no, I mean, what happened to like public radio in the US, or things that we could like, thank goodness for like NPR, and there used to just be so much more sources that we could trust, and that we don't have that anymore. I feel like that's so much of the problem. And the medium is the message. It totally does affect it. And it's just like with poetry, the reader is also the writer, because poetry is more an invitation than a newspaper article that's like giving information, or fiction that's telling a story that's like going a specific place. Poetry is more an invitation to think about something, and it's not giving you information in the same way that most other forms of writing are, like essays and everything, that are really telling you what to think. It's like this invitation, and the reader is the writer. But that actually is across the board with all writing, is that the reader is the writer, and how we interpret it. And the tool we get it from informs how we interpret it. So it's very, the edges between things just get very blurred. And I think we're seeing that. We're very aware of that now. And that's part of the problem with figuring out what's true. People don't know what's true anymore. They've lost sight of how to do research or how to check things. Like, I'm always like, will you guys please just have Snopes be a tab on your computer before you send anything? Just like, please check what you're sending. Or, it's like to encourage each other to do that, to check our sources.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about Walter Cronkite, when he was the announcer of the news, and how many millions of people followed and trusted that voice, or Dan Rather later on, and these that we have a tendency to want order and to have look for people we can trust, and among poets too. We look for poets we can trust to give us true, whatever that true emotion, heart speech, and yet we have this wonderful explosion of possibilities. I wrote a translation of I translated a poem from a friend of mine in Spanish, and within a couple of hours the poem had been transformed into a YouTube video with music and text in English and Spanish, and then it's hurling around the internet. What I mean is we are moving at an incredibly frenetic pace as poets, as human beings in our societies, and it's just that much tougher to sort out the false from the true and to assess it. And we need guidance. Look, I don't want to defend Facebook, but then there's something called community standards, right? Or Facebook apologizes to Sri Lanka for having allowed a lot of hate speech to go on, and which resulted in real death. People during riots that were organized by extremists to attack ethnic groups, in Sri Lanka's case, Tamils or Muslims, minorities, and using social media as a way to so the way the reaction was, well, to block the social media, but then we want to have our cake and eat it too. We want to have this technology available to us, and we think, oh well, okay, they're just a bit odd. They have these false, strange conspiracy theories, but these false, strange conspiracy theories have come to haunt us. They come to dominate our lives. They're controlling our powers of our economy. So we have to fight back. Now, fight. I don't mean fight with guns or with even with our hands. I mean fight with our language, with our thinking, trying to fight back with clarified thinking. There are sorting through the different pieces of advice about the coronavirus, and then picking the one that seems to be fact checked, and then sharing that as widely as we can, doing our community role. A poet is supposed to say the news of the heart to his or her listener, to his or her fellow community member. So you say the news, but the news now includes coronavirus, and you say it in your poems, or you can also add a fact-checked, well-researched, based on science, based on lab work study that I turned to certain places like the New York Times had promoted this particular article the other day, and then I kept spreading that around. So we can't leave the media. I mean, we need, and I advocate for turning over the First Amendment. At the same time, we need to find ways to, even if we have our frustrations with these giants like Facebook or Google, we need to find ways to work with them because we depend on them as well. And without them, our world will be unimaginable. Maybe we have been lobotomized. We've been changed so much that we can't imagine a world without the social media. And we are, of course, communicating on social media as I speak. And I hope I'm making at least a little bit of sense. I'll stop there.
Well, that's something. It made plenty of sense to me. I was hoping we were going to hear some poems, but I want to cut in and address some of the things that were just said. Indran, you mentioned Walter Cronkite, and I was thinking of that when Jane was saying how we used to have. I think you said we used to have more sources we could trust. And I kind of want to push back a little bit on that. I want to almost say trust attached to fewer sources, or that in some ways it was perhaps a virtue from the perspective of trust, if that kind of locution can make sense, that we had fewer sources. So you had Walter Cronkite, and everyone could go turn on Walter Cronkite. Everyone got the same message. With the the explosion of possibilities that you mentioned, Engine, with the kind of the fragmentation of media, the multiplication of channels, and then the multiplication of content, that undermined any sort of sense of, well, this is true. You could start zooming in to what became, what you had more choice. You could become more active and pursue what made sense to you, or what flattered you, or what and you could zoom in on that, and people would congregate on that. And then I think social media took that up to another level in terms of made it interactive, and then you can kind of participate in the creation of content. And when it becomes a much more interactive and kind of almost a creative act, truth is just moved further away. We're not that interested in being beholden to what is true, to receiving what is true. We're more focused on becoming active shapers of what is going to be perceived as true. So I think, and you've all touched on this in ways like, we are changing, and our ways of relating to media and content is changing as the technology is changing, and it's changing us, and it's changing our relationship to it. Leo, you were saying perhaps kind of a more willingness to believe what's false. My question, when I was asking about some clarification of that, I kind of think of it as, we're just much less interested in whether it's true. I mean, it's no longer, we're just, truth is just not the concern that it once was. I keep in my mind, when I think about these things, George Orwell, he said he feared that the concept of objective truth was fading out of the world. I think with this kind of this fragmentation of media, of content, and our engaging in interaction with it, it's just kind of gone in some sense. Like we no longer want, the concept of objective truth is to perform a certain kind of work, kind of cognitive work. But we're less and less interested in engaging in that cognitive work. What we're up to other things now. Now, these might not be good things for us to be up to, and they may cause and are causing challenges and problems. But I think that there's this idea of if we're in like a post-truth, is that truth doesn't matter as much for the types of social activities we're increasingly engaging in, particularly through media, and the more addictive the content is, and the technology is, the more we immerse ourselves in mediated content, and the less time we are spending in immediate engagement with the world around us and with other human beings.
Joseph, if truth doesn't matter anymore, what do we teach our children, or what do we teach the future? If truth doesn't matter anymore, I become so selfish, so solipsistic, so involved in our being creators of our own world and mastering. This is another version of mastering nature, this notion that we can make our own histories and truths and realize ourselves infinitely to infinite possibilities. But at what cost? The cost is what will, pull down thy vanity, I say pull down. Thou art a beaten dog beneath the hail, a swollen magpie in a fitful sun. That's what Pound wrote at the end. He'd been stuck in jail. He was charged with being a traitor, and this pound with this massive mind with so many languages and so much knowledge, including economic knowledge, and yet he became this. He screwed up. I mean, he went off, and we are all going off basically on our own pride, at the moment. I don't want to sound like a moralist or a preacher, but that's what I find. I think I'm sympathetic to that concern. I mean, we have to slow down, control, cultivate our garden in a different way. I mean, I think of course, the climate emergency and this virus being related, and we need to reprioritize what's important and what's not, and keep certain truths self-evident, like keep the election date fixed. Keep we have to struggle more. We have to keep going. We have to. I probably said something that I don't know. How that will come back to kick me. But we are nervous right now about everything because of this virus. In part, it sort of brought up all of our fears and our anxieties. And it's also given us a few pleasures. I mean, at home there are certain pleasures from confinement. But anyway, I'll stop there. I really am enjoying the minds here. So I'll stop there.
So I actually I had planned to read a poem. Normally I read famous poems by other people, but I'd wanted to read one of my own poems today that definitely does. It's called What Warrants Pride, and it's completely connected to what we're talking about, because really that is so much. Yeah, and this poem has a lot of references to things that have happened recently. I just want to remind you of some of the things that are mentioned in the poem.
Well, can you read the poem, Jean?
Yeah, I'm going to read it.
Okay.
And maybe I'll
remember the Miss Universe story.
Yes.
Yeah, the Miss Universe story of the wrong Miss Universe. Okay, so that's mentioned in here. Okay, Cecil the lion that was killed, the super famous lion on that reservation, and some rich guy shot him. So those are a couple of the things that are mentioned here. I just wanted to, remind you of those stories. What warrants pride? What did you solve with your guns on the way to the gas station with the wrong Miss Universe? The problem with this millennium is we still defend the clubs we are born into. Country, team, religion, gender, race, money. Even if you think you earned it, deserve it, converted, the only thing fair is age. Every number for 1 year until death. Every other chromo something falls like pachinko, random as a hand of cards dealt at the reservation casino. The Mets versus Al-Qaeda. Winning is making it look like not cheating. With steroids, heroin, insider trading, fish genes, the blood of Christ, stem cells, perms, toupees, blow up someone else's art, house, baby, crop, GMO, OMG. Keep reading the same old book over and over until you believe you deserve your own country and your underwear matter. Fukushima makes us all shit our pants the same way regardless. Your hat, your dinner, your cock is the best. Your precious history belongs to Allah, humanity. Then, when you are so proud of your Homo sapien sash, your shining award is Miss Taken Away. Goddess's name robbed by terrorist acronym. The burning petroleum bush under the ball gown reveals the other is just like you. Suicide bomber, Judge Pope Malala, Miss Columbia, cop, just doing my job at the carnival. Shooting the clown in the mouth, bursting his bubble costs more than the stuffed animal prize is worth. Ask Cecil. The hunters are the biggest conservationists. So, who fills your belly, your tank? What's in the bank?
Superb. Let me come in right now with a couple of poems, and following up on that, on on Jane's. I'll read first a prose poem, which is the preface actually to this book, The Migrant States. And I wrote it, of course, before this pandemic, but it's in that sense, it's a historical piece, but it's being released now. Migrants are on the move, while our earth is staggering, roiling and rolling, drunk on human breath. We're living in the middle of the emergency, and some of us will not be able to escape. The seas rise and boil, brush fires move at a lightning clip. Heavy, sooty swats of Delhi air penetrate masks and decorum, silting lungs with a slow accumulation of poisons. As if our lungs, the breathing tubes, the bellows of our lives, have become a burial pit, the sand thrown in. So what does the migrant state? 200 years after Walt Whitman set off from Pomanock, this is what his descendants find along the road. Democracy sputters, stutters. Can we survive the current surreal comedy where words, the raw material of poetry, have been spun, propagated as propaganda that threatens, as Orwell predicted, to make lies into truth, war into peace? I would add the jobs of reporter, poet, witness, as suspect now as they were in Plato's mind when he tried to create his exclusive republic. Yet I admire Plato because I champion free speech, the free mind. Let him have his republic, only let me state my poetry. We need open borders everywhere, open borders of the mind, of languages. We need to cross over at ports of entry with our dancers, tongues, poems, and gods. So pack your bag for the trip. I invite you to put these poems in an outer pouch, easy to grab and show at customs. In my words, sir, there are no vegetable products, no animal residues, no contraband. They are here to wake up essences, dreams, memories, to tell stories of where people come from and the disputes, struggles, successes they encounter along the way. And they offer an affirming flame, attempt to speak truth to power, and I believe can be useful in the most important fight of our time, that of reducing our footprint, our ecological stain. We must take care of air, water, and earth, become really worthy stewards. We must care for all other living beings with whom we share the ecosystem. We are not kings or dictators. And thankfully, we have a system, that least bad of systems, according to Mario Vargas Llosa, but ours, the one Whitman discovered walking abroad from Pomanock, the one these poems reaffirm in these migrant states. And I'll read you one poem of one of these Whitman poems. It's a little bit long, but I think it raises some questions that might be pertinent for this conversation. It's called Ode to and from Whitman. Ezra said you were pig-headed, but he recognized that you made the new wood. We have been carving for more than 150 years since you first painted the leaves of grass. Now we have plastics on our mind, floating islands of waste, stuffing stomachs of fish and whales, weighing a third of all fish in the sea, and by 2050, even more than all of those fish. What would Walt say now? Turn his attention to water, to streams and rivulets, rivers and lakes, spilling into the plastic-ridden sea. What would he say about the inheritance of Roosevelt? Who is turning in his bed? Would he monitor delivery of babies, sailing out to the birth canal the 9th month midnight to be abandoned at a hospital door in the alleyway of Walmart by a young mother driven mad with anxiety, guilt, shame, and fear? Would he say that the mother can murder and create? Would he say that if that mother had the right to choose and the means, she should be allowed to stop cells multiplying before they become embryos, or further along open eyes and start to taste spices consumed by their host? Roe versus Wade. Whitman is grand, contains multitudes. He did not reject the Negro or prostitute. He saw man and God in a blade of grass. This poem is for a panel on Pan, on nature, on the transcendent spirit, God or sprite, wood genie. What courses through the blood of a stevedore and a banker, a rabbit and a leaping hare, a sloth and a panther? Life, yes, and impending death. Imagine driving along a highway at 70 miles an hour. You must have thought at least once, what if you swerved into the guardrail to escape a deer, across the median into incoming traffic, to kill oneself, to be killed, to have the hand on the button of your own desire and fate? I am large, I contain multitudes. I will roar through this life and will not stop until I stop. Moloch be damned. The military industrial complex be damned. America, go bother somebody else. I have more than $2 in my pocket, but I'm not satisfied with a coffee at Starbucks. This is a relative poem, an elusive child, a homage and a diversion. Can you spot the antecedents? Or shall we protest again in our time, so he from black and I from white cloud free? The old arguments and quarrels course still through our psyches. Walter's contemporary as a blade of grass, a cow allowed to chew its cud in a field, an organic tomato, a wild mushroom. Walter's relevant as a raw food juice designed to pick you up every morning, to say you can go local, bring the chains of distribution home. You can go abroad and walk to the greengrocer, live in the world and in a small space of earth to learn to bear the beams of love. William Blake gave us that adage. Walt said, there was never more inception than there is now, nor any more youth or age than there is now, and will never be any more perfection than there is now, not any more heaven or hell than there is now. I'll stop there. Sorry, someone called while I was reading. I hope that didn't interrupt.
No,
It was
thank
fun.
you. That was
Those were great reading. Those were great poems.
spectacular.
Thank you.
And yeah, I can't wait to read that book.
Anyway, I just, what does a poet do but ask questions? I
Mhm.
don't think a poet offers answers,
Right.
or a philosopher for that matter, but I'm not qualified to say. I hope you will.
I guess I'm I want to say I'm qualified. That they handed me a degree, but and that's being somewhat facetious. But philosophers will they will disagree with each other about almost anything. But I'm firmly committed to the idea. It's the asking of questions, I mean, life is about, I think, offering answers. That's what we try to do. But the answers we give, the answers that we live, are related to the questions we ask. We have to ask ourselves better questions if we want to be living out better answers. But the questions
That's a great statement. Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
I'm actually a little overly blown away by Indran. It was just beautiful and amazing. And yours, too, Jane. I think it's something that both and all three poems sort of touch on is this idea of humility, of understanding our what are present in the ecology, in the society, individual among other humans, and then the humans in ecology, and so I often think about, and it really does tie into this, and even what I said too, that there's always this group of people, the powerful people, who step on the little people, who don't care about the nature of things, who build a dock that ruins a tide, that makes the beach go away. And there's always those people. And I always remember thinking as a kid, having some members of my family who were completely uneducated. I mean, completely uneducated. But and they were humble. They admired education, not, they didn't bow down to it, nor should they. But And it feels to me today that the quote unquote the little people, the not want to be also the powerful people, and that's what sort of there's a lot of insecurity, and I think that leads to a lack of humility, and everyone wants to grasp onto a conspiracy theory so that they could tell an expert to go to hell. And I think that's different today than it was when we were younger. I have a lot of issues with the Walter Cronkite version of media that, we had 3 choices, 3 networks. That's what you got, right? And that was controlled by powerful people. But I also think they had a little sense of noblesse oblige, right? That they kind of, there was that element of it too. So this should be better. But what it's really done is like sort of empowered people to be assholes, to put it bluntly, where it used to be just sort of the certain, we could all say, oh, the rich, the robber barons, we talk, right? But now it seems like everybody wants to be like that. And it's a real lack of humility. I know what I know. When a carpenter comes into my house, I don't understand. I don't understand anything about cause and effect in the natural world. I'm amazed by carpenters. I love carpenters. I don't tell a carpenter but I don't say, hey, I just saw this meme that says, you put a 2x4 together. I don't try to tell them what to do, and I'm not being. I hope I don't sound condescending. I mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why people can't just sort of be that way. Be happy with what you know and learn the things you don't know.
Yeah.
Leo, if you had been a carpenter, but then again, no. There's a book, but I'll post a link. But you might be interested. Recent book in the last 2 years by philosopher Michael Lynch called "Know-It-All Society," which talks a lot about what you were just speaking to, and the lack of humility, and how this is undermining much about our social interaction and our society. But I'll post that, as I say, in the comments and in the links.
How does one learn humility at this stage? And how does one teach humility at this stage? And through what means and through what media?
What do we value as a society too? As a culture, I feel like recently, in the past, 15, 20 years, the individual being special and deserving more has been so much of what culture's been pushing for. Whereas in the 1940s and 50s, the success was to be average. People wanted to be average. It was it was a different goal. You didn't want the giant house and to be on top of the world and be the best. You wanted to be a contributing member of society that had enough for their family. It wasn't it's now we're so obsessed with stardom and fame in this way that I don't think at least American culture had before. So it's the humility isn't, it's where are we modeling this in society? Where are we, what are we looking at as our role models? Look at who our leaders are. Look at how do we learn that? We learn it from seeing what's valued around us. And if it's valued around us, we incorporate that and we aspire to be that. And people aren't taking responsibility for the earth. Some people are trying to, but other people are, the powers that be now are taking away all these regulations, and no one, the powerful people, the money doesn't want to be responsible for it. And it's just. yeah, how do we inspire ourselves to win? To like, how are we going to get the good guys to win?
And also another question I would like to ask you guys: how do we deal with the fact that the sky is clear over Delhi right now? You know, in my piece, I talk about the smog Delhi and all of the respiratory illnesses that result from that. And then how do we deal with the fact that temporarily we have this vision of a place where people can breathe and live well and so on, and know at the same time that that is only temporary, because all of the coal-fired industries are just waiting to come back into production around it? And is it just an idle dream that we can dream about a new way of arranging the means of production, or really becoming a greener economy everywhere, not only in the United States, I mean, wherever we are, whether it's India, America, US, or China, or wherever. Anyway, I just ask you whether this is just a temporary dream. Take advantage of it when it's there, and then we'll just have to live with the reality that we're going to go back to
We
something.
don't have to go back. I mean, it proved something to us. I really don't think we're going to go back. I think we've seen too much, and too many people are happy working at home, and a lot of people aren't. We see what it means. Like, what if you don't have everyone go to the office by 8:30? Look what it does to the traffic. There's less traffic. It's safer. It's cleaner. We don't really need to have all these in-person meetings on the other side of the world. We do have things like Zoom, and we can conduct business like that. Like, I really don't see us going back, because we like seeing the Himalayas from Delhi. We like working from home. It's like we have power. We can choose not to go back. And I think that it's been inspiring that you can really, the impact that this great pause has had on all of our lives shows us what's possible with coordinated action. And it's really, it's an exciting moment. It's really exciting and terrifying, but we have a huge impact on our decisions. The way we choose to live has an impact on our planet. And I think a lot of people didn't really believe that before, and that now it's undeniable from firsthand experience. So,
well, I think it's telling that in the last few decades, the only year that CO2 levels dropped in the atmosphere was during the 2008 and 2009 financial meltdown. And I think that, there you go. Like,
not a coincidence.
But you know what, though, Jane, and I'm going to push back a little bit to say that, it's not just a matter of conservation. It's not just a matter, I think for things to really change, there has to be a radical reorganization of society, which is going to go down probably too political a road than Joe would want to go, because I think we want to stick to a little bit of the bigger pictures. But, we live in a consumption society, and I'm not saying that I am being judgmental, but I'm being judgmental about myself as well as everybody else. I'm not above it. I don't, unless that changes radically, I don't think, I think what you're talking about is a start. And I wish that we can conceive of a different way to live. I'm not sure we have the imagination. And from what I see, all anybody says is, "Oh, I just want to go back to work." Now, people need money, and I understand that. But, I think there's some people just like, we have a right to work. We want to go to work, whatever. Like, really? I love my job, but I'd rather go to work when I feel like it and not go to work when I don't feel like, but I have to go more than I feel like it, because, that's how we live.
What about asking the question, can the media be used to advance going local, staying at home? In other words, we're talking about media and how we manipulate it, or how we don't, or are manipulated by it. And I mean, realizing you're pushing back, but at the same time, nothing is going to be exactly how we think it will be, but we have a tool here, we individually and also as a society, this technology, this medium, this Zoom, for example, and other technologies to do with as our imagination tells us, and we can. I suppose we have public service messages, yes, but I mean, maybe that person who is frustrated and just wants to go back to work could somehow be educated. Now, I hate to sound like some kind of patrician, but I mean, there needs to be an education, a self-education, a self-consciousness, a realization. And to the extent that one can, I mean, you have a role to play as a teacher. Every one of us is a teacher. Every one of us is a student, right? And we will be that way until we die. So I know it might sound very idealistic and so on, but I don't know how to go into a red area zone, so to speak, and preach, with my with my poems open and no belt, no protective belt except these words. But anyway, I'll stop there for your thoughts.
I wonder. I guess maybe like with Leo, kind of wanting to, not so much wanting to do a little pushback, but and I don't know exactly what the motivation is. Whether maybe it's maybe a little more cynicism or more concern. While the clear skies are encouraging, and I think for some people who might have thought there's nothing we can do, it's like, no, actually, maybe there is something we can do. That maybe these things aren't reversible. That this is
right. Joe, Intron, do you live in New York City?
Did I
live in New York City?
Not now.
He doesn't
No.
live there now, but he used to live here.
Used to. Yeah.
I mean,
live
I'm
in
sorry to cut you
Rockville.
off, Joe, but I just want to say, like, I'm seeing stars in New York City. I don't really, except one or two of the bright. I don't. You're seeing more stars. It's lovely.
It smells different.
It totally
I'm
smells.
sorry, Joe, but go ahead.
I guess what I was, I don't know how much things are going to return to normal, because I mean, so much is unforeseen in terms of when will there be a vaccine or something, and how many people are going to go back to work. If they can go remotely, and this is going to have various other effects. People, New York City, a place like New York City, is probably going to lose population because the people who can work remotely may very well decide to move out because it'll be cheaper, and they might have, and if some of the things which make New York City an appealing place when you think about it, and you think about the arts and various other kind of institutions like that. When are people going to go back to Broadway? When are they going to go to the opera? When are they going to be doing these things? All of a sudden, New York City, the cost of it, there's fewer perks. You're going to have people leaving the city, which might be positive in some respects, might for the environment, but there's concerns about the tax base shrinking, and various services. There's going to be a cascade of
environment. I mean, it's like living in a city is the most environmentally responsible thing we can do.
No, I'm saying it might be better for the environment if you had fewer people, and fewer cars and what have you, but it's going to have also detrimental effects. But I guess, but another point I wanted to make, and it is, I think it somewhat ties back into the initial point about media. And Indra, you were saying, what can we do? How can we make use of the media maybe to get the message? How much of some of the things we have been lamenting in this conversation are driven by a kind of an economic framework about the media is a profit making business where the point is to get attention, to get people to to read this, to view that, and so it isn't being informative that matters. It's being it's being engaging, it's being exciting, it's being lurid, it's being confrontational. Truth, again, like fake news is a wonderful article I read by Oliver Berkman at The Guardian. He said how the news became reality. It's like he makes this point about how um, fake news it's like a logical conclusion. It the truth doesn't matter as long as you get the clicks, as long as you get people engaged. Um, so is there is as long as the kind of the media business model is as it is there a way around this? Or do you see almost like a consumer's revolution in the use of the technology that we have? I mean, is that's what is necessary?
All it takes, Joe, is a decent person who doesn't need the money. The internet is cheap. I mean, that's the beauty. That's right. I can't, before the internet, if you want to transmit the ideas that we're talking about, we got to have a printing press, we got to have people to distribute the newspaper, we have to, right. We could just do that. And I think people do it, actually. Honestly, I don't think money is the problem here with the media. I don't.
Okay.
I think it's more. I think it, like we've talked about, it's more to do with people's psychology.
But money is the problem for the journalists who are losing jobs and so on. I mean, that's a serious problem. So so do we protect journalists like we protect, I don't know, certain kinds of, I mean, we take care of them in the national budget, but then we're talking into changing the way we run ourselves, at least in this country. So I don't know, but we have how do we protect poets? They get grants sometimes, or they get some foundations to support them also. So artists in general. So our journalists also, like artists, a kind of superstructure thing, something that, but we need it to make ourselves meaningful. Anyway, I just throw that out just about the money. And
well, I think that's a great point, and you mentioned the poets. Let me get the philosophers in there too. I want them to get a cut of the pie, because to the extent that we don't know completely yet, but to the extent that this is going to radically alter higher education, and the model that we have been using of higher education is likely to change, and that has been been the principal occupation, philosophy professor of most philosophers. That's kind of how they get paid. They too. What is how are we going to address these sorts of issues? What will it take?
The living wage,
So, Joe,
and also universal basic income.
But other countries do it. Other countries support the arts. Other countries support, do a much better job. Canada does, I know, as a fact. So it's doable, Joe. It just has to be the political will.
Well, the political will, but it's also, but it's. I do think there's a kind of a pride. So, I mean, to go back to Indran's point about using this like kind of a localized, focusing, as you said. I think that's you use that term. How do we fund, DNA info? In New York, how do we fund more local news that local communities can use? I mean, because we're losing that here, in the city. We hardly have any. I mean, the New York Times really isn't a local paper. So I mean, there's what's the new one, the West Side Rag. How can we fund these things? How can we support them? Do they have to
Yeah.
be crowdsourced, or should there be money in the New York City budget? I don't know where New York City is going to be getting its money, but there should be money in the city budget for local news organizations. That.
Yeah, yeah, no, it makes me nostalgic. I used to write for the West Side and the Chelsea Clinton News, small papers on the west side of Manhattan, and I would write theater reviews, and I was paid $30 a review, and I got 3 tickets to see off Broadway, off Broadway. It's a great life, you know. Um, and I don't think those papers exist anymore. I'm not sure though. But you mentioned the West Side Rag. Yeah, we have to find. I mean, those papers are not only in New York City but everywhere around the country. There's so few. Penn is a big campaign at Penn about drawing attention to this, the disappearance of local news. And it's funny about local, because locally sourced is supposed to be better for you, organically speaking, and looking at your neighbor. I mean, suddenly this fact that you can't fly to the other side of the world makes you want to look across out of your window at the person who lives next to you, and try to learn and share with that person. So what I mean is, I don't know. I'm going off that point, but I'm trying to say I think in our conversations about the media, we also have to think about the messenger, basically, and how to conserve the messenger. I mean, the official messenger, the professional messenger, so to speak, as opposed to the amateur messengers. All of us who are engaging, creating our universes, through the media. I mean, through social media. Anyway, an Army Corps of Engineers, a Peace Corps. Do we have to create some kind of a, Public Works Administration again? Post November, maybe we can do that.
That would be exciting. Anybody? Any final words? I see we're approaching the top of the hour, and some may want to go to their windows and clank some pots and pans and things like that. This has been a wonderful conversation. This is rich and rewarding and all sorts of wonderful ideas. And Jane, would you share your poem?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Injun will put a link to your book.
Thank you.
And that it's been great. Anybody, any final comments or thoughts you'd like to go?
All I'm going to say is that I can't wait to read, to buy and read Injun's book. And Jane, from now on, I wish you'd do more of your own poems, because that was amazing.
It was.
And I've read, because I've read your book of poems, and I kind of couldn't even look you in the eye for a little while after I read them. So that was great. And I also listened to your song recently with the icebergs, which is really cool. So everyone go out and do that.
I would love to see you live again with the icebergs. Yes.
No.
Yes, yeah.
I'm so sad. Like I'm faking that I'm doing okay. I'm like a mess.
You're not alone.
I got blackout drunk at a Zoom party last night. I mean, who does that? I am missing social interaction, and like, I love you guys. Thanks for doing this show. It makes me feel a little bit like.
I look forward. Thank you.
Let me just say from the bottom of my heart, thank you for including me in this wonderful, rich, moving conversation. And to get to know you a little bit better. All of you, and Jane, I mean, it's just such a thrill that to see her thriving, in her music and as well as her poetry, and as a teacher, and just meet you, both of you, Joseph, Leo. Really, I will look for your work as well, and so keep me posted too on publications and books as you write them or have written them, and let's keep talking, whether it's offline or online.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Be well, all of you.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.